Okay, so Premiere is a non-linear editor, or an NLE. There are quite a few of them out. On your phone, um, you should have a basic video editor. Usually they're linear in how they're set up. In other words, I can take images or movies and put them end to end to end to end, and then hit play. It'll put them all together. I know, like my daughter likes, I think it's called Cute Cut, which actually is a little bit of a nonlinear video editor for an iPhone, which is pretty nifty. Um, but Premiere takes that up a level. It is movie level quality. There are better editors out there, I suppose, based on reviews, things like that. But it's the one that I've been using the longest. It's the one that all of you should have access to in terms of Creative Cloud. And it's the one, again, for architecture, most architecture offices have Creative Cloud subscriptions. So you're going to have access to this even if an office doesn't know that they have access to this, okay, through Creative Cloud. And yeah, it's used. Premiere is used on film. It's used on all sorts of things. Okay, so on Premiere, I'm just going to walk through the basics of how I set things up, how I use things. Okay, so I'm going to start. This is the opening screen on Premiere. I'm going to go to New Project. The first thing to understand with Premiere is it just will eat up storage space. Creating film, creating video takes a lot of hard drive space. So you really want to pay attention to a couple of things that can happen: where your files are stored and where your temporary files are stored. So that's one of the very first things that happens up here. I'm going to just title this class demo. And I'm going to set my project location to my desktop so that I can delete it. And it's going to be named class demo delete, because again, monster files, gigabytes worth of files created in a short amount of time when you're working in Premiere, unlike something like Photoshop where you're working with a still image. Okay, so on that, I'm not selecting a file, I am selecting a folder. Okay, once I have that, I'm going to click create, and that is going to set up my basic workspace. Now I have customized the workspace in this case to be sort of what I like. If you go to Window right here and Workspaces, as you are learning, I would suggest going to Editing. It will not open up on Editing by default, I don't think. But this is going to cover, the editing workspace is going to cover most of the key things that we're going to do in this class. I think the default is actually Essentials, but I would definitely go ahead and set that to Editing. We have a couple of key things that are going to happen with this. This is my media browser storage bin. Okay, so I'm going to bring files that I want to use in my project into this location. My different video clips, all of those types of things go right to here in my storage bin. This is my timeline. So this is where I start organizing things, tracks 1, 2, 3, A, B, and C. It's also where I start organizing my sound effects, my score, my audio files, all of that stuff, and sequence them with my imagery. Okay, so it is going to run left to right as you start to see things. My program monitor is essentially my output. It is the preview of my output. So it is it's a video screen. Okay, over here on the left is my effects controls. That is, you can think of that as Photoshop filters, things like that. How do I change things? But if you start adding in music and sound effects, it's how I change the volume. It's how I modify how it's heard. It's how I can start establishing in points and out points, all of that kind of stuff. Over here on the right are the effects that I can apply. So again, if I'm trying to think about this in terms of Photoshop language, these are my filters. Cool? So inside of Premiere, you can absolutely set things up, sort of pre-establish this is going to be 4K video with this kind of sound, blah, blah, blah. As you are learning Premiere, there's a much easier way to do that. And this is like one of the most important things in terms of how I teach Premiere. And this is one of the things that goes wrong the fastest when you are learning Premiere. And that is Premiere will define itself. It will define your workspace based off of the very first clip that you bring in. Okay? So the very first thing that I bring in, if it is a 360 video that I've rendered out or a panoramic image that I've rendered out of Twinmotion, it is going to establish the entire workspace based off of the very first thing that I move from this location, my bin, to this location, my timeline or my sequence. Cool? So you really want to pay attention to that. And often I will tell you guys, dude, your workspace is so jacked up right now. I don't know what you did, but it is a complete mess. Start over, and let's start over by bringing the very first object in. And it sounds terrifying because like, oh, I spent 4 hours laying all this stuff out. But it's like if you spent 4 hours laying and sequencing things out, to have your old Premiere file and your new Premiere file, it takes you about 5 minutes to rebuild, which is a lot less time than going back in and trying to reestablish the right base for everything to work. Okay, so let's take into account if I am going to bring something in from Twinmotion, which is pretty much the workflow I'm going to be teaching you guys. Okay. So I'm going to go into Twin, and I'm going to launch one version back, the 2022 version, so I can launch a specific scene. And then we're going to bring in a specific file type, so that you can see how that sort of plays out end to end with Twinmotion. And so right now we're thinking more about storyboards than we are thinking about VR. But I'm going to show you both examples here in the next 10 minutes. Because if you think about, so a VR, if we're rendering out a 360 video, right? The 360 video is essentially 6 cameras, right? It is front, back, left, right, up, down. Okay, it's rendering 6 different views, looking in 6 different directions, and it's seaming those together, right? A traditional video clip is one single camera looking in one direction. Okay, so if I go to videos, and let's just grab, I think down here towards the bottom, should be a short video clip doing something like this. So clearly this is a shot, definitely not meant for VR. A motion like that, a sideways motion where I go low to high, that's a really traditional camera cut that you do with a dolly, right? A camera on a dolly and it's got the rig on it and you kind of have somebody lift it and it goes, right? So nauseating to put somebody in that situation in VR because it's like you're floating through space going sideways, messes up your inner ear, instant vomit express. Okay, don't want to do that to people. So I know that this is a clip meant to be viewed in 2D. So if I take stall pan 2 and do my export, I want to make sure that I am deselecting everything on my videos, and I am doing stall pan 2. If I look at its properties, I do not want this to be 360. I want this to be standard. I want 4K resolution. Okay, so that's the size. 4K is going to be our standard for this class. And MP4, that is our other standard for this class. Okay, MP4 is Blu-ray resolution, Blu-ray compression. Okay, so from here, I can simply go back to export and start export. And I'm going to send this, in this case, to my desktop. Class demo delete, select folder, And I'm going to let it do just a couple. I'm not going to render out the whole thing. It shouldn't take very long, but yeah, it should go way down from 50 minutes here in a little bit. Yeah, but even then, I don't care to let it go all 5 or 6 minutes. But we'll let this cook for just a while so I get a decent amount of content. And part of this demo today is showing you the difference. Okay, so we are right now rendering out a short little, I think this was a 15-second clip, something like that is what I had. This was to build our trailer for the Rising Bravery game that my daughter and I are working on together. I want you to see the difference, how fast this happens versus how fast a 360 video happens, because that's what I'm going to render out next, so we can look at those 2 different file formats to bring in. Yeah, 20 more seconds. I'll let it finish. I'll let it finish cooking. I definitely will not let the 360 video finish. Like for me, my non-technical brain would say, okay, if I'm going to render a 360 video, it's rendering out 6 cameras. It should be approximately 6 times as long. And that's definitely not the case. And we'll talk a little bit about the technicals of that. So at this point, if I go to my folder and I look at desktop, class demo, Stallpan 2, that's my video. Cool? Everybody with me? 4K, ready to go into Premiere so that I can put multiple clips together and put it with audio, tweak the coloring, all that stuff. Okay? So let's also go into this and let's look at video, and let's look at one of the shots. And here that is meant to be rendered out in 360. Okay, so this is a moment where we did a little trickery, fun stuff with Twinmotion. It does that while we have sort of a talk about a water dragon, because dragons, okay? So that's what the game's about. So it's raining, all that stuff. This is meant to be viewed in 360. Notice the camera isn't moving. We have effects moving around it. So if I want to render this out in 360, this is water microhabitat. So I'm going to go down to my output, video, deselect all, water. It takes a little while for these to populate. This file for me has gotten too big, but fortunately we're about 85% done with building this world. So it's definitely pushed my laptop to its absolute edge, but it's still functioning-ish. There it is. It's right there. So I'm exporting that. Again, I'm going to go to more. I am no longer standard. I'm still MP4, but I'm going to render a 360 4K. Okay, so same resolution, but this time we're going to render it in 360. I'm going to hit export and start. Again, I'm going to choose my folder, select folder, and we'll let that cook for just a bit. And we'll look at the time. My guess is probably 20 hours for this one. And again, it feels like it should only be like, you know, the last we did 3 or 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes times 6, because 6 cameras, it should be like 18 to 20 minutes. That's just not the case. The big calculation difference, as I understand it, 4 hours, maybe, no, it's going up. As I understand it from the programmers, the difference is the calculations that the video card is having to do are dramatically different, because the camera it basically auto-defines the lighting. So it adjusts the lens, the aperture setting, all that stuff, like a real-world camera does. It's sort of like that set on auto. But now it has to pre-calculate all of those conditions for 6 different views, so that when it stitches together, when I'm looking at the sky, it's washed out on average to when I'm looking across the horizon, as opposed to when I'm looking at the ground. Like if you think about using your phone to take pictures, or even a high-end SLR camera, those are 3 different settings that a camera would use dramatically so that the grass looks like grass, the plane, the horizon line looks right, and the sky looks right. But because it's rendering in 360, the number of calculations to get everything look right goes through the roof. Okay, so yeah, what is this? This is 5 hours. That's probably about right. So that's actually not so bad. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel on this because it should have created at least my first one. And let's bring those things into Premiere. Okay? And I know now we're pushing it, but we're almost done. Okay? So on my bin, a couple of different ways to do it. In terms of bringing things in, my favorite way is to right-click in the open space here and say import. So I need to navigate to my desktop, class demo, and here's my 2 movie files. So even though I hit cancel on this one, it did build a couple of frames for me. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring those 2 in. So as you are working on your storyboards, you're going to be scanning those in, or you're going to be sending them directly out of Twinmotion to layer them in. For your first pass at your animatic, when we are working in 2D, you will be bringing in your first 4K file, dragging and dropping that into the timeline, and that's going to establish everything in terms of this is a 2D video, it is 4K, and now I can start working through that. As I bring in more videos, so I'm just going to import and find something else somewhere. Just so we can start looking a little bit about how this is going to work. C drive, Drury, scholarship, Rising Bravery, there we go, trailer videos. So as I start putting videos together, first video, second video, that's a little bit harsh. I can start coming in doing video transitions, cross dissolve, drop that right between the 2 videos, and now I have a nice fade one to the next. So that's where I start building up. We'll go further with those things Wednesday, okay? But let's take one more look at the difference that happens. So I'm just Control-Zing all the way back to before I brought my first video in. If I start this production with a 360 video and drag and drop that in first, this is a completely new aspect ratio. And if I activate my VR headset, I now actually have this as a workspace designed for 360 video inside of Premiere. So that very first clip, the very first move that you make establishes your entire workspace for Premiere. Super important. Okay, so when we're working 2D on an animatic, it should be a 4K 2-dimensional file. Shortly after that, we do a VR animatic. That will need to be a 4K 360 video when you bring your first file into Premiere. Cool? That's it for today. I'll do any questions, anything like that you might have. And then we're going to do more technical learning, this type of stuff, Wednesday and Friday.